For somebody that's in their career and is interested in giving back, if they're not really sure what organization to help with, they know their interest, but there's so many organizations like you said. Can they contact your organization and say, I'm interested in arts? Could you give me a list of people that I might be able to help and volunteer my time to?
I think the best thing they need to do first is to think about where their passion is. Because if you're going to be volunteering your time, you're going to be doing it at the expense of your family or your free time that you could be doing other things. So, you better enjoy what you're involved in. So whenever people ask me that question, I always stop and I tell them, go away and think for a while about what really interests you. When you read a story in the paper, what kinds of stories interest you? What kinds of human interest stories, get your attention and kind of go to your heart and your soul? And when you figured that out, then I think you can begin to pursue a list of organizations. There are plenty of places to look. Certainly United Way has a list of organizations. We do as well. And also to go to the website of organizations. That's a great way of finding out more information. But it has to be a personal search, I think, to some degree. The other thing I should say is not every nonprofit, not every volunteer pursuit is to the benefit of a nonprofit organization. Think of all the coaches, all the people that are, organizing canoe clubs, all of those kinds of things are huge volunteer reservoirs and people who are contributing back to our common good.
Kelvin, our show is focused on social entrepreneurship, so primarily companies that have a profit mission and a social mission. Through your experience, have you seen any really good examples of how this can work in Hawaii's market? It's interesting because, everyone sort of has this interesting delineation between for-profit and non-profit. And my contention in the 21st century is you're seeing these two things kind of merge. First of all, you're seeing nonprofit organizations become very sophisticated business organizations in how they operate, how they strive to be efficient, how they sort of strive to be relevant in the marketplace. So you're seeing nonprofits, I think, become increasingly adept and agile organizations. On the other side, you're seeing for-profit organizations adopting stronger social missions. Take Timberline, for example, where Jeff Schwartz goes into Timberline and really reinvigorates that organization by putting front and center this whole notion of giving back as part of Timberline's value statement. I think if you look at the competing war for talent that takes place in the for-profit sector, certainly, and we see that in the nonprofit, values and intrinsic rewards are increasingly important to people. And I think especially as you look at younger people who have grown up in the service learning module at school and others, they're coming into the workforce and they want something more than a paycheck. Now, part of that is personal advancement and reward, but also part of it is being part of something that has deeper intrinsic meaning to them. So I think if you're a for-profit business and you can fold in social mission or social benefit as part of what you are trying to achieve, you have a greater opportunity to attract and retain high-quality talent than if you don't. What examples can you give of local companies or local entrepreneurs that have done this successfully?
It's really kind of hard for me to point to. I think for the most part, our businesses have been pretty good about that. I can't give you an explicit example off the top of my head, but if you look at local companies, they have a very, very strong sense of civic responsibility. They're deeply involved with the Aloha United Way or their respective United Ways. They've seen it as an opportunity to develop the talent within their organizations and to have them have stronger relationships and ties to the community at large. So I just sort of see it as second nature here. But I do see it as growing increasingly explicit as we evolve this merger between the nonprofit and for-profit sector. I think you're going to see more of these kinds of blended organizations.
So what's your take on the notion that people think about nonprofits as not really businesses? They're just kind of social organizations.
Well, I just think it's, I think people have to realize that nonprofits are businesses. They're, as I said earlier, they're a huge part of our economy and they're a very large employer in our economy. They're extraordinarily flexible organizations, but they're just a different kind of business. If you stop and think about the normal business situation, it's very easy to look at the bottom line. You have a customer, and the customer buys your goods or services, and it accretes the bottom line. The difference is, in a nonprofit sector, you oftentimes have this separation, this duality between who your customer is or your client and basically who's paying for it. You know, let's say you're Institute for Human Services. Your customers are the people who are living on the streets that you're trying to give shelter and food to. But the people who are paying for it are the city and county government, the state government, your donors and foundations. So it's very hard to have an alignment that's very clear and transparent in those kinds of situations. The other thing about nonprofit organizations is they typically don't get financed the same way a business does. You get a business plan, you walk down the street to Central Pacific Bank, and if you're lucky enough, you can get a business loan. There's nothing that's akin to that in a commercial context of financing a lot of what nonprofit businesses do. So nonprofits, almost by virtue of the way they're defined, live hand to mouth. Now, some people say that's not being businesslike. Well, it's not being businesslike because they operate in a different context. It's not that they aren't businesses, it's they're different.
So how would you go about raising funds? I mean, I know you mentioned before that people are donating these funds because they're interested in helping the cause. But say the funds stop from the community.
That's the fragile nature of a nonprofit. Very few of them, most of them are expending all the money they can to achieve a mission. That's the other part of it, is, you know, you don't put the money aside because a lot of nonprofits, a lot of organizations out there, they spend all the money they raise because they're in the business of doing that. They're not in the business of trying to perpetuate the organization as it is that they're trying to achieve a mission. You know, feed the hungry, you know, shelter the homeless, take care of kids after school. So they're by nature fragile. They do depend on the generosity of our community, which is a very generous community. 9 out of every 10 households in Hawaii give to charity every year, and they do so at a rate that's higher than the national average. But in a small community like this, we all depend on that a great deal.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Kelvin, on Greater Good Radio Hawaii. For more information or transcript of today's show, please visit us online at greatergoodradio.com. This is your host, Evan Leong and Carrie Leong, saying please join us next time for another episode of Greater Good Radio Hawaii. Thanks for joining us today on Greater Good Radio. For more information or transcript of today's show, please visit us online at greatergoodradio.com. This is your host, Evan Leong and Carrie Leong, saying please join us next time for another episode of Greater Good Radio Hawaii.